Maki, Zenin, and Geto are very well known characters in the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbase and are very well liked, but in my opinion, both of them are pretty underrated when it comes to power. So in this video, I'd like to compare the two and see who is stronger than the other by going over both of their feats, abilities, and overall stats to see who would truly come out on top. But before we begin, I'd like to say that if you enjoy these type of videos, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel, since that'll tell me to make Jujutsu Kaisen videos more in the future. And also consider joining my membership to join the members only Discord and get early access to videos. To begin the video, I'll start off with Geto, specifically Team Geto, and eventually as we go further into the video, we'll get into the Volume 0 Geto scaling. Now in the hidden inventory arc, there's a profound narrative between Gojo and Geto, that being that they are both best friends and they are the strongest duo of modern day. Not only because of their raw power, but also because of their teamwork and how well they strategize together. But a surprising amount of people actually misinterpret this narrative, and in this video I'd like to propose the idea that Gojo and Geto are actually relative to each other in stats, since a lot of people think that Gojo is still stronger than Geto by a lot at this point in time. Now to go over this, we first have to go over the statement that says that they are the strongest, and it reads as follows. Satoru and I both came to a decision before we met you. If the kid who's the star plasma vessel should refuse the merger, then we'll call it off. Geto replies saying, sure about that, and we might have to fight Master Tengen. And Gojo simply responds, don't worry, we should be fine. We are the strongest. Now keep in mind, at this point in time, Gojo is still very arrogant and cocky about his power and loves to show off, so if they weren't truly relative in abilities and stats, then it wouldn't really be a point for him to call them both the strongest, where rather he would just be the strongest. But there's actually more to this, and it comes by the fact that in a volume extra, it's actually stated by Gege that Gojo and Geto fight quite often, and even with this fact, Geto is still quite confident in fighting Gojo and picking fights with him, meaning that when they finish fighting, there's probably no true winner at the end of it, showing that they're relative once again. Now moving to Geto's actual feats on screen, we have his fight with Toji. Now keep in mind, this Toji that Geto is fighting should actually be stronger than the one that Gojo fought because of two specific key factors. Number one, Toji said he was rusty when fighting Gojo and says he was just getting the hang of his skills when he finished him off. And number two, Toji used a binding vow, which I like to call the disclosure amp, which basically gives characters in JJK a reason to actually explain their abilities to their enemies without seeming stupid like in other anime. This disclosure amp makes your ability more potent when you explain it to your enemies, and it's said to be something that anyone can use. But with that out of the way, we can get into how Geto actually did against Toji. In this fight, Toji's able to easily cut through the Rainbow Dragon, which is Geto's most durable cursed spirit, but quickly after this is caught by another one of his cursed spirits into a simple domain, but he's also able to quite easily get out of this. And Geto tries to sneak behind him and steal his cursed spirit, since it is of course his weapon cache, but it actually rejects him, and Toji ends up getting the winning blow on him. Now of course, like I mentioned before, just because Geto did lose pretty swiftly to Toji, does not mean he's not relative to Gojo, and since Geto doesn't have many feats in this fight, we'll have to be going on his narrative of being the strongest along with Gojo to really scale him anywhere as a teenager. But moving on to Geto's abilities, he has the Rainbow Dragon, which is very durable, as well as a cursed spirit that can put people in simple domains which they have to oblige, and multiple squid-like curses that can stop bullets, and of course many more unnamed and unknown cursed spirits in his arsenal. Now to go on to Maki. Maki at the beginning of the series is pretty strong. She's even acknowledged by people like Mei and Gojo of being a grade 2 level sorcerer, and is able to do battle alongside Megumi with Playful Cloud to attempt to defeat the disaster cursed Hanami. And to be honest, they did some pretty good damage with Playful Cloud, since it does bring out your maximum physical abilities. But in comparison to someone like Teen Geto, this Maki simply doesn't stand a chance. Later on in this same arc, we see that Hanami says that Yuji is more agile than Maki, but his strength is disappointing. But this is only the Viz translation, and the raws actually imply something that's way more interesting for Yuji. A better translation of the scan would be, his instantaneous force surpasses the girl before him. This could also mean explosiveness or explosive power, which would mean that Yuji's raw physical strength surpasses Maki even with their Playful Cloud. A better matchup for Teen Toji would be Maki when she realized and used her heavenly restriction. If you don't know, Maki has a heavenly restriction where she loses all of her cursed energy, but in return gains an immense amount of physical prowess, just like Toji Zenin. We learned that since Mei wasn't trying to really become stronger as a sorcerer, it was actually holding Maki back, since Jujutsu treats twins as the same entity, meaning that so long as Mai lives, Maki cannot realize her true potential. But after being ambushed by their father in the Zenin hideout, Mai ends up sacrificing herself for Maki and leaving her one sword with her construction curse technique and giving Maki her dying wish: destroy everything. And Maki, with her newfound power, did not hold back at all. For context, both of the girls were thrown in a pit with a bunch of cursed spirits, all of them being grade 2 or lower, but as soon as Maki comes to, she destroys every single one of them. And as soon as she steps out of the door, her father is reminded of the fear that once struck the Zenin clan, just by Toji's sheer presence. And with an almost instinctual reaction, he uses his technique Blazing Courage and attempts to fight Maki. But Maki, before he even notices, completely cuts him down with one strike and says, "My, let's get started." And keep in mind, Ogi is considered a grade 1 sorcerer at this point in time. But Maki doesn't just stop after cutting down her father. She goes on to ruthlessly and mercilessly cut down the Kukuru unit, a unit full of Zenin males who don't possess curse techniques and undergo grueling martial arts training every day. Maki makes quick work of them, turning the entire room that they were in into a bloodbath, and she is then faced with the Hei unit. The Hei is a group composed of people who are recognized to possess skills of a semi-grade 1 or higher, according to the criteria of Jujutsu High. And of course, they are the strongest sorcerers in the Zenin clan. She is first faced with a 2v1 against Chojuro and Nobukai, but she's not able to only hold her own in this 2v1, but she's also able to take a piece out of both of their throats, but is only stopped by Jinchi and his curse technique. We don't know the ins and outs of Jinchi's curse technique by now, but from what we can observe, it seems like if he looks at you and keeps his eyes open, he can stop your movements completely, and also electrify you. And while being frozen by Ranta and trying to overwhelm his curse technique, Ranta screams, "The current Zenin clan exists because of Master Toji's whim. You must have noticed, Maki's become the same as him. Right here, right now, kill her." And Jinchi goes in for the finishing blow. But when we come back to the battlefield, we cut to Ranta saying, "You did it, Master Jinchi," being on his knees and bleeding, and he falls out seemingly being dead, with Maki also holding Jinchi's head, showing that Maki pretty much has no problem fighting against semi-grade 1 or higher level opponents, even in a 4v1 situation. But the final fight she has in this Zenin massacre is against Naoya Zenin. In their first interaction, Maki's actually seen being relative with him and actually counting the frames that he's moving at, but Maki eventually gets frozen when he taps her, and she gets kicked through a boulder, and kicked once again, leaving a crater. All the while, Naoya is saying, "You are not Toji." Descending the insignificance is the ignorance of strength. No one understands Toji except for possibly Satoru. And while Maki's on the ground, Naoya continues bullying her, and saying the one who stands with him is me. And Naoya ends up going towards her at full speed, attempting to punch through her at the top speed he can, because the strength of projection sorcery is it gets stronger while it gets faster. And at this moment, Maki tries to embrace him, waiting for his blow head on. And we learn at this moment that she suffered a lot of injuries and lost a lot of blood fighting Ogi and fighting against the Hei, meaning that throughout this whole fight with Naoya, she hasn't been full power. But Naoya, instead of hitting her at full speed, just tags her in order to pause her movements for 1 second and to get a hit off on her. But before Naoya can hit her, Maki turns around completely and puts her fist in front of his face, saying that he can make 24 movements per second, and with her body, she can finally see it, showing that not only her physical strength got better, but also her perception, and ends the fight with one clean punch to Naoya's face. Now, Maki versus Geto at this point in time is actually far more interesting, since we do clearly see that Maki is compared to Toji multiple times in this fight, and there's even a statement from one of the Shonen Jump guys, saying that in order to improve her fighting capabilities to participate in the Calling games, she headed towards their clan base in order to attain the cursed tool. Instead of losing everything here, she became as strong as Toji once was. So it's pretty clear that at this point in time, she is at the level of Toji, but if you watch my video on Toji's strength, you know that I actually believe that there are different levels of Toji, and the one that fought Gojo and Geto weren't full power Toji. Or prime Toji, I guess you could say. I already mentioned before how he was rusty from fighting Gojo and Geto, but it's also the fact that I think the mental state of a Heavenly Restriction user, and sorcerers in general, is a very high factor in how strong they are. And simply, I don't believe that Toji was fighting for the right reasons when fighting RCT Gojo. And also, if you want to go by Viz, they say that when he's revived in the Shibuya arc, their granny uses his name Toji Zenin because it's more efficient to use their name when they're at their highest power. But to be fair, this is mistranslated, so I don't believe it too much. But with Maki being on the level of Toji, who at least fought Geto and Gojo, she should be able to take Geto head on. The only thing I can see her having a problem with is the Rainbow Dragon, since she probably can't cut through it like Toji can, since when Toji cut through it, he actually used the Soul Liberation Blade, which cuts through the souls themselves, rather than the durability of the opponent. And of course, at this time, Maki doesn't have the ability to perceive souls. But honestly, I don't believe that that one specific curse is going to give Geto the upper hand on Maki, and she'll still probably find out a way to end up in a W. But so Maki probably takes it against Teen Geto. But what if we go into Volume 0 Geto? Well, off the bat, we already know that Volume 0 Geto is stronger than Hidden Inventory Geto, since he specifically went overseas to collect more and more cursed spirits. And as to how strong these cursed spirits are, well, we'll get into that very soon. But to get a read on how strong this Geto is in physical prowess, we get to look at his fight against Rika and Yuta. With Playful Cloud, Geto's able to keep up with Yuta and even get the upper hand on him with his cursed spirit. And as Yuta starts to get the hang of battle more, he gets even faster, and Geto is still able to combat him. But of course, Geto does end up being punched away by Yuta. After this, Geto brings out one of his special grade cursed spirits and combines it with 4,461 more curses using his maximum technique, Maximum Uzumaki. Before doing their final blast, Geto says that it was a good thing that he came to kill Yuta before he learned how to use Rika properly, implying that if Yuta had full control over Rika, he would definitely be stronger than Geto. After this, Yuta uses a kiss from Rika to surpass his limit of cursed energy, and after this clash, Geto loses a large portion of his right half. But what we can tell from this fight is that Geto was pretty relative to Yuta in physical prowess alone, with Yuta maybe having the upper hand. But this Geto still probably should be above the Toji that fought Geto and Gojo, since Geto and Gojo were able to react to Toji, and Maki's still around that level, but Geto has only been getting stronger and gaining more cursed spirits, and he's of course also acquired the Playful Cloud. Overall, due to a kind of lack of scaling, I think it's pretty hard to say who would win, but Geto would probably take the W on a Maki that fought the Zenin clan. But there is one more version of Maki that may be able to beat him, that of course being a fully realized Maki. Now the difference between Maki and Toji, and what makes her not fully realized in the Zenin clan massacre, is simply her senses. Toji is someone with super enhanced senses, and of course Maki is as well, but Toji is just to a different degree, to the extent where he can of course sense the soul. But Maki actually gains this ability in her fight with cursed Naoya. After sumo wrestling multiple times with the sumo wrestler in his domain, she's able to actually find herself and free herself, giving her senses equal to Toji. These senses allow her to smell light or see sound, basically sensing everything about their opponent and herself. Now to explain how much of an amp this is for you, she goes from getting completely blitzed by Naoya to being able to pretty easily blitz him, and she's able to hurt him to the point where he feels like he needs to use his domain expansion. But this is the moment we learn that domain expansions are useless against Maki. Because Maki is just like Toji and doesn't have any cursed energy, barrier techniques treat her as simply a building, and most sure hit effects and domain expansions target the opponent by targeting their cursed energy, with the exception of Sukuna's Dismantle, which specifically targets inanimate objects. So even if we were being charitable to Geto and saying that he actually has a domain expansion, even though it's never really confirmed if he has one or not, it wouldn't even work on Maki because she would simply be treated as an inanimate object inside of it. But remember what I said about Prime Toji? Well, Maki actually reaches the heights of Prime Toji after her fight with Naoya. We see that at the end of the fight, the narrator says a demonic fighter equal to Toji Zenin was fully realized. Now this gets onto the question of, well, how strong is Prime Toji? But honestly, we don't even really have to get into that. But the first thing I do want to say is that durability in this fight absolutely does not matter for Maki, because after the fight with Naoya, she's able to officially see the soul of other beings and cut through them instead of cutting through their actual durability. So all Maki needs to win this fight is pretty much speed. And in speed, Maki's actually able to keep up with the 15-finger Sukuna inside of Megami's body, and they're actually quite relative. Now there's a statement that says Sukuna's cursed energy output is lower than Megami's body, but highly credible translators do agree that this is most likely just in reference to his cursed technique and not his physical body. So if she's relative to him in speed, this same Sukuna is able to completely blitz people like Ryu, who like it or not is able to fight on equal terms with Yuta. And even though Yuta is holding back killing intent, this shouldn't mean whatsoever that he's holding back speed, and Ryu is able to keep up with him pretty easily. And keep in mind, Yuta's only gotten stronger from his time skip, and he was still relative to Geto all the way back in volume 0, meaning that fully realized Maki should pretty much outclass him. Domain wouldn't work, he's slower than Maki, and Maki has a soul cutting object, so she doesn't even need to cut past his durability. But that's all I have for today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure of course to like the video and subscribe to my channel, and comment down below what you think of the video. But yeah, goodbye.